Okay, welcome to Module 2, and in this module, the grammatical tense we'll be looking at is past perfect. Okay, so earlier in this module, you read an article about a career changer. And in this article, we read about a person named Lee Kavanaugh. And he talked a lot about the reasons that he wanted to change his career. He also talked about the actual change and what happened afterwards. But right now, let's think about some reasons that you might want to change your career, or any person. When I think about reasons that a person might change their career, I think it's because perhaps they don't like it. Maybe it's just something that they don't like doing and they thought they would like it, but they don't. Another reason is maybe you don't make enough money. Another is that you have a true passion for something else. Or maybe, unfortunately, your career field is changing and you now have less opportunities than you had before. All of these are good reasons to change your career, but let's look specifically at the example from the reading before with Lee Kavanaugh. So let's look at some examples taken exactly from the reading. So these are sentences taken directly from the reading that you did earlier. Lee Kavanaugh's profession had changed and he was resenting it. It was clear, however, that the landscape had changed. The profession, from my perspective, had altered massively since I had joined. The management's emphasis had switched wholly to the task, with teams and individuals becoming a distant concern. I had started to question whether we, collectively, as a profession and as a nation, were really preparing our youngsters for life beyond education. So when we look at his examples, we can see that he had become very unhappy in his work. There had been a lot of changes that made him grow to dislike his work. And he really felt like the focus of management had changed. And all of these contributed to him wanting to change his career. So let's take one more look a little bit more carefully at these sentences. Lee Kavanaugh's profession had changed and he was resenting it. It was clear, however, that the landscape had changed. When you look at these two sentences, what tense do we see here in both of them? We see, for example, Lee Kavanaugh's profession had changed and he was resenting it. It was clear, however, that the landscape had changed. So what tense is this, had changed? This tense is called the past perfect. So when do we use this tense? We use it before another event in the past. Sometimes we call this the pre-past. And how do we form this tense? It's very easy. We use had plus past participle. For example, had changed. Lee Kavanaugh's profession had changed and he was resenting it. So let's look at some of the examples that we saw earlier. The profession, from my perspective, had altered massively since I had joined. The management's emphasis had switched wholly to the task, with teams and individuals becoming a distant concern. I had started to question whether we collectively as a profession and as a nation were really preparing our youngsters for life beyond education. So, when we're talking about the pre-past and we're talking specifically about Lee and his life, we see that what he's talking about is an event that happened in the past. And the event is that he changed jobs. But he's also talking about events that happened before he changed his job. For example, his work had changed. He had become unhappy. Management had changed, etc. And these All of these events contributed to the reason why he changed jobs. So they're important. But he's telling the story from now. So he's going back and he's saying, okay, I changed jobs, and then these are the things that happened before that that made me want to change my job. So we can look at this timeline here, and it might help us understand the order of events a little bit better. In this timeline, we can see that there are 3 time periods. There is now, the past, and the pre-past. So if we think about now, we know that Lee changed his job and he now works in finances. But he's telling the story about something that happened in the past. He changed his job. This is what the story is about. However, there are some important aspects of this story, and there are things that happened before he changed his job, and these things happened in the pre-past. So for example, Lee had started to question if they were really preparing students for life after school. Another thing that happened was that management had changed focus, and his teaching job had changed. So these events are events that happened before another event in the past, and because of that, we need to use the past perfect. So, can you identify more examples of the past perfect from the sentences below? So we can see that I had already taken up the Scout leader's offer of an informal chat at his office. I had already made a lot of wrong turns. I'd picked myself back up. Our finances had taken a bit of a battering. In fact, when I look back now, I just wish I had been a bit more aware and proactive. So that brings us to the idea of contracted forms. When we use the past perfect, we can also use a contracted form. For example, I had picked myself back up. You could say that, or you could say I'd picked myself back up. You could say I wish I had been more aware, or I wish I'd been more aware. And both are fine. They have the same meaning, and you can use either. Native speakers use both alike. Another thing that is important to note is that we use the past perfect with other tenses like past simple or past continuous, and these are called the narrative tenses. So basically, we don't use past perfect alone. We don't usually use any tense alone. We use it together with other tenses. And when we look at all the past tenses, past simple, past continuous, past perfect, we can call them the narrative tenses. For example, Lee Kavanaugh's profession had changed and he was resenting it. I had started to question whether we collectively as a profession and as a nation were really preparing our youngsters for life beyond education. Here in these 2 sentences, we can see that the writer is using both past perfect and past continuous. And you should remember this because when you write, when you speak, when you use grammar in English, you should always try to use a variety of tenses, a combination of complex and simple tenses, especially at the advanced level. Okay, let's look quickly at the forms. Let's first look at positive. So the past perfect is pretty easy to make. You just use subject plus had plus past participle. And again, as we mentioned before, you can use a contracted form. For example, I'd, we'd, she'd, etc. Here's an example. You can say, we had saved a lot of money before I changed jobs. Or I had saved, or she had saved. It wouldn't change. Okay, let's look at the negative forms. This is also pretty easy to make. We just use subject plus had not or hadn't plus past participle. For example, we hadn't saved a lot of money before I changed jobs. And for the question, we do like we have seen before. We start with had, then subject, then past participle. So for example, had they saved enough money before he changed jobs? And sometimes there's some phrases or words that we can use which help us to understand the order of events. For example, before and after. If you use the word before, like we do here, had they saved enough money before he changed jobs? This will help us to understand the order of events. We know that saving money happened before he changed jobs. First he saved money, then he changed jobs. Here's an example with after. He changed jobs after he had saved enough money. So first he saved money, then he changed jobs. Some other phrases we can use are by the time and when. For example, by the time he changed jobs, Lee had saved enough money. So again, this helps us understand the order of events. He saved money, then he changed jobs. And an example with when, he had saved enough money when he changed jobs. First he saved money, then he changed jobs. Okay, well, thank you for your attention. I hope this was helpful, and we will be putting this to use in our assignments later in the module. Thanks.